The connection between energy and the Russian Federation and the European Union have big problems since the start of February's war between Russia and Ukraine 2022. Before this situation, Russia offered roughly 40% of the EU's gas needs. Sanctions and rising disputes over global issues derailed this. Europe accused Russia of being dynamic using energy sources as Russia accused America of using a political tool. Penalties and technical problems. Key pipeline problems like Nord Stream 1 experienced a lot of cuts and, eventually, shutdowns. Russia stopped sending goods to some countries that wouldn't pay in rubles, forcing the EU to look for other energy sources. In answer, the EU sped up its method for increasing diversification when compressed natural gas from US and other places. Qatar is also putting money into new systems. These changes. Petrol prices went up because the market was unstable in Europe to rise by more than 300 per megawatt hour in 2022. This spike caused prices to go up and major effects on homes and businesses in the area. Now Russia has stopped sending any more petrol to also. As of November 22, Austria 2024, the price of natural gas in Europe has experienced a big rise, hitting levels close to the year's high. This surge is mostly because of increasing conflicts in world politics between Russia and Ukraine, in particular Ukraine's use of the UK-sent Storm Shadow rockets. Defense against Russian military targets like new information has made people more worried about possible problems with petrol products that lead to more market. The Dutch title move was unstable. Front-month futures facilities that serve as the standard for natural gas in Europe, it cost 2.61% more to 4,686 per megawatt hour on November 20, 2024. 64. This upward trend shows the market sensitive to events in other countries and how it might affect energy providers in the UK. The Energy Authority Ofgem said, and the cap on energy prices will go up by £21 from January on 2025. This change is because of rising prices for cheap petrol, by political unrest around the world, and because of the harsh weather. The average yearly energy bill to 738 people lb. Let's talk about the connect now. Europe and Russia. From the past view, after the Second World War, Europe was divided into eastern and western parts. Blocks in the west, with the USSR in charge of a lot of trade in Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, and Western Europe. Europe was limited because of ideas, differences and fear of each other. Despite this, business dealings began by the late 1960s. Austria had become the first country in Western Europe to bring in Soviet Union gas in 1968, just before the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Soviet Union. A historic deal between Austria's OMV and the Soyuz Neft exports by the Soviet Union gas supplies of 142 million cubic feet per year, 1 million cubic meters over the years. These imports grew hugely, with Austria bringing in 9.11 billion cubic meters of Russian gas by 2017. The key position of Austria given it the ability to play a place where Russian gas is sent through transit by way of the Balm to Western Europe garden and the March gas hub, making it easier goods for France, Germany, Italy, and the UK. Other countries in Western Europe followed suit. When the 1980s ended, Austria was in first place. 15% of France's gas came from the Soviet Union, and 30% of the natural gas that Germany uses, cementing energy as an important part of economic ties between East and West during the feeling cold. The Vietnam War in the 1970s was a time of detente during the Cold War. Concerns led to working together on business between this time. The Soviet Union and Western Europe witnessed the growth of important projects to build energy infrastructure. The DRBA oil pipeline and the Urengoy, the Pomary Urod gas pipeline, played a key roles in providing energy to the Soviet Union. The DRBA pipeline brings oil to European markets in Russian, which means friendship began. Business in 1964, covering about 5,100 miles, hundreds of kilometers long. It's one of the largest oil pipes that move crude oil. Saudi Arabia and Tatarstan, Russia send oil to in different parts of Europe. Ukraine came after Poland and Hungary. Poland, Germany, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. What the pipeline can hold is between daily production of 1.2 to 1.4 million barrels. Ongoing work to boost this strength, especially in the section relations between Poland and Belarus, began in 1984. The Urengoy Pomy Urod pipeline, it was also called the Bratza or Brotherhood. The pipeline goes for about 4,500 kilometers. The natural gas comes from the going to the Urengoy gas field in Siberia. Several European countries to Ukraine. The tunnel was built to handle a large enough to hold 32 billion cubic meters, allowing for large amounts of gas-sent goods to Europe. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. The Union led to the rise of as an independent country, the Russian Federation. During the 1990s, the state was depending on, despite facing big economic problems with Russia's trade in energy with it, was important that the European Union grew. Partnership and unity. In 1994, the deal set up a structure for better business and government ties, including agreement on energy. By 2005, Europe and Russia had trade to more than 166 billion euros, with a big part is played by energy exports. Russia's trade with the EU deal for teamwork and work together. When the PCA of 1994 was signed in June 1994, starting to apply in December 1997, the PCA wanted to encourage trade and investing. Helps Russia make the change, move towards a market economy and encourage political conversation. It gave a full picture of structure that covers different parts of trade, unity, and human rights, science and technology for democracy issues with education and training, the war on crime, transportation and energy, environment for telecoms, and EU and Russia's trade and culture. By 2005, how much trade there is between the EU and it was more than 166 billion rubles. Russia's trade surplus and the EU are, that's about 8% of its GDP, that about 50 billion euros. Russia was third most important trade partner for the EU partner, making up 7.3% of the EU's. Although Russia's biggest trading partner, the EU trade partner with a 52.9% share, Russia's fair share of exports of energy, oil and gas in particular, was central to international trade between Russia and the EU. In 2005, Russia provided a large amount of Europe gets its energy from oil and gas. Exports making up a big part of this energy is sent by Russia to the EU. Depending on each other helped. The strategic EU-Russia ties were very important during this time. The PCA and the growth in trade showed that advantages of working together between the EU-Russia, especially when it comes to energy. Nevertheless, these ties have changed over time because of many business and politics. Let's stop for a moment to think about that. So far, you've liked the film, right? Could you please hit the like button? The button helps us reach more people. And telling us what you think or feel in even more of an effect is the comments. Thanks for watching. Now let's get back up. In the early 2000s, to repair ties between the Europe was Russia's biggest market in the early 2000s. Energy products is our business partner, such as oil and gas, made up the Russia's main trade to the EU. An energy market that was stable helped the EU provide, while Russia got access to a huge market for its goods, and trade in goods strengthens economic ties. 2014 crisis in Ukraine and sanctions. The 2014's Crimea problems were important time for EU-Russia ties, causing a chain of events and responses that had a big impact on how the economy and politics changed between. The event was on both sides to mean different things in Russia and the West from both points of view. What the story from a Russian point of view, from the Russian point of view on the taking over of Crimea, was aimed at bringing the country back together through ancient Russian land, backed by a vote in Crimea in 2014, where most of the people allegedly chose to join Russia. The government of Russia and the media said the move was a reaction to the political unrest in Ukraine in 2014, which Moscow saw as a help from the West, a coup that put Russian interests at risk and Russian-speaking people's rights in. Because of Western sanctions, Crimea, Russia responded with countermeasures, including not letting food from the Europe and other Western nations. The acts were seen in the United States as a try to get income independence and a chance to encourage local industries by bringing in goods substitution. Russian media drew attention to how strong the economy of the country is, putting the focus on penalties led to new ideas and less reliance on Western Europe technology. Western countries were in charge of Europe, and the US saw the takeover of Crimea as an invasion of Ukraine's independence, and in answer, the EU used international law, implemented a set of penalties aimed at important parts of the Russian economy like defense, energy, and finance. Some of these steps were limits on Russian state-owned banks can do business in the EU, banning guns and dual-trade goods, and limit exports Russia with cutting-edge energy technologies. From a Western point of view, the goal of penalties was to put pressure on Russia into taking back what it did in line with the Minsk agreements. Crimea deals that are meant to solve the trouble in the east of Ukraine. The media often talked about the effects these restrictions on the Russian economy, seeing a big drop in EU. The EU and Russia did business from 2013 to 2015. More than 40% less was sent to Russia, showing the important business consequences of the joint penalties. Russia and the EU are under a lot of stress. Economic relationships between the two groups declined, and both sides lost points. The farming business in the EU for situation took a big hit because losses because of Russia's food ban, about €5 billion just in 2014. On the other hand, Russia sends energy to the EU, which had historically taken the backbone of business ties, only saw initial disturbance that was limited how much Europe depends on Russian gas. At the same time, Russian stories often pointed out the different rules of Western practices, claiming that what Western powers did had not led to similar punishments or Western reaction around the world. Storytelling, on the other hand, stressed how important it is to international rules and keeping people from more land ownership and violence. After the imposition of the United States and China in 2014, Russia and the European Union had a fall, but slowly got better over the next few years. Until 2020, the EU stayed largest trade partner of Russia, giving the country 37.3% of its trading in goods. In general specifics, 36.5% of Russia's imports came from EU citizens, while it sent 37.9% of its goods to Europe. Energy markets and trade dynamics. Energy, mostly oil and natural products. Gas stayed important to the EU. Relations between Russia and the United States in 2020 was one of the biggest energy suppliers to the EU, giving large amounts of oil. Europe's energy mix that year was made up of oil, gas, and coal. Had 35% oil and gasoline in it, natural gas, and 24% of goods, with Russia being the main source in the EU for these goods are brought in from Russia. 24% of the EU's energy needs were met in 2020 markets. Counts of all the things traded in 2020. What the EU and Russia had in common was €174 billion in imports from the EU. They were worth 95.3 billion rubles. While goods sent to Russia added up to 79. Energy products made up €1 billion. This trade includes sending oil and gas abroad, making up a big part of Russia's sends goods to the. However, the EU's response to the sanctions, trade and economic growth after the bans Russia had to follow in 2014, targeting sectors stayed in place like money, energy, and defense. Steps taken to put pressure on Russia concerning what it did in Ukraine, and in reaction, Russia put in place counter-sanctions, such as bans on some EU agricultural and cultural goods. These mutual sanctions changed the way people traded, resulting in attempts to diversify by the two beginning in 2022 and going up from there. The war in Ukraine in 2022 triggered a series of, because of the penalties against Russia, a big drop in trade between the EU and Russia from the beginning of 2022 to the end of the second quarter of 2024. EU goods will be sent to Russia fell 59%, while imports drop in goods from Russia 187%. Effect on EU sales to Russia. The EU imposed penalties were aimed at many areas, such as finance and energy and defense, which led to a large cutting back on exports to Russia. The main product groups were machinery, vehicles, medicines, chemicals, and plastics for electrical equipment. For example, exports of tools and cars dropped by a lot during this time. What effect on EU imports from a lot of what the EU bought from Russia, and especially in the energy. Russia's part in the extra EU from 21% to 12%. Less oil was brought in, 1% in the second quarter of 2022 to 1% in the next 3 months of 2024. Natural gas imports will be the same. Energy products and others went through sharp drops because of penalties and attempts to spread energy sources. Overall trade balance, the result of fewer exports and imports, caused a big change in the trade balance between the EU and Russia. The biggest trade imbalance was €45.8 billion in the second quarter of by 2022 to €0.2 billion in the second quarter of 2024. New events in Russia stop. Last week, Austria got petrol. OMV AG in Austria said that Gazprom gas would be fully suspended by PJSC packages delivered. This choice was made after OMV tried to reclaim an arbitration award of €230 million by stopping payments to the Russian. After this statement, the energy giant within Europe, petrol prices went up by as much as 2.7%, climbing to their highest points in for almost a year. Austria's dependence on the power of Russia and its role as a transit hub shows how hard things are, brought about by the sudden cut in supply. While throughout history, Austria has relied on Russian gas that goes through Ukraine, soon to happen of a key transit agree on something by the end of 2024. Moreover, uncertainty has bigger effects on the stopping of Europe's energy market. Russia sends gas to Austria brings to light ongoing weaknesses in demand for energy in Europe is going up because of colder weather and less wind. Putting out energy has already led to more gas tanks being taken out, putting even more strain on stocks. How much the EU depends on liquid natural Natural gas or LNG from different sources. Places like the US and Qatar there are some problems, but equipment restrictions and price changes around the world remain big problems. The economic problem has slowed down the EU switching to clean energy, as some member states have gone back to using coal and other sources that don't regenerate to meet right now. These energy needs. Recent events make it clear that investing more in renewable energy and modernizing the plan to cut down on long-term reliance on outside sources provider. In the end, the stop of Russian gas sending goods to Austria is a key turning point in the EU's energy swap. In spite of gains in reducing dependence on oil, the results of decades-long Europe can no longer rely on Russian gas. Open to market and global threats. To really achieve energy independence will need continuous investment, more coordinating politics, and making plans. Ability to see through the difficulties as the world's energy situation changes. After this movie, scenery. Thanks for seeing this movie. Thank you very much for joining us today. If you liked what we wrote or gave you ideas, please think about showing your support by giving it a like and signing up to stay in touch with our community.